cracking down on robocalls. That's what New Jersey Senator Bob Menendez is hoping to do today with new legislation. He's outside his office in Newark right now to talk about the new push. Let's listen in.
Sophisticated spoofing technology to hide who they are and flout the law to get around the federal do not call registry. It's happened to all of us. It happens to me. When I get a phone call from a number that shares my area code and exchange, I'm always tempted to pick it up, thinking it might be a family friend or a local leader. Instead, it's a spoofed call, some automated garbage about junk health insurance or a vacation resort that doesn't exist, or one that I'm really so tired of. Hi, this is Cindy. I'm calling about your student loan, which I haven't had for decades. In any event, someone in my office actually got a spoof call on his cell phone from his own number. I'm sure he's not alone. It seems like these scams are growing more malicious by the day. There are hackers who pretend to represent a big company like Apple and convince people to hand over their passwords to their computers. There are scam artists who pretend to be the local police department, threatening you with jail time if you don't pay a fake parking ticket. And especially around tax time, there are robocalls who claim to be the IRS, but are really on a mission to steal your identity and run off with your hard-earned tax refund. The harassment, the interruptions, the invasions of privacy just keep getting worse, and today's regulations just aren't keeping up. And to make matters worse, in recent years, we've seen court rulings undermine Obama-era regulations aimed at stopping some of the most egregious abuses like mass auto dialing. One of the biggest challenges we face is that our current laws were designed to punish legitimate telemarketing companies that sometimes make mistakes or break the rules. What we need are tougher laws to go after the scam artists who don't play by the rules in the first place, and better protections for consumers constantly bombarded by these calls. That's why I've co-sponsored a piece of legislation that will close loopholes in our telemarketing laws, stop the harassment, and give law enforcement a better shot at catching the fraudsters flooding our phone lines. The Telephone Robocall Abuse Criminal Enforcement and Deterrence Act, or TRACED Act, is a bipartisan bill that I'm pleased to say has a real shot at becoming law. It just passed the Senate Commerce Committee earlier this week, and it has broad support, with 44 Senate Republicans and Democrats signed on, and 54 state and territory attorneys general, including New Jersey's own Gubir Grewal, backing the bill. The TRACED Act has three key elements to tackle the scourge of robocalls. Number one is authentication. Our legislation requires phone companies to adopt the necessary technology to verify the legitimacy Hello? Hello?
This is a friendly reminder. Your vehicle's factory warranty may have expired. We have been trying to reach you through the mail and have been unsuccessful. Your vehicle is at risk of not being covered. Please press 1 to speak with an advisor now. Again, please press 1 to speak with someone regarding this matter. Please press 2 if you would like to be placed on our do not call list.
You planned that, didn't you?
Did you plan?
No. I left my phone on. As I told our other guests here, I left my phone on and said, if it rings and if it's one of those, then we'll play it out loud. I get this all the time. And I assure you I could not plan it. With what I'm proposing, they wouldn't want me to do anything for them. In any event, this has three key elements. Sometimes God is good. Three key elements to the scourge of robocalls. Number one is authentication. As I said, our legislation requires phone companies to adopt the necessary technology to verify the legitimacy of calls before our phones even start ringing. The FCC has been working with the telecommunications industry to implement this technology on a voluntary basis. But we need a firm deadline and a clear mandate consumers can count on. Secondly, the bill dramatically ramps up enforcement. We lift the statute of limitations from 1 to 3 years so that investigators at the FCC have more time to catch illegal robocallers. In addition, we direct federal agencies to work with states' attorney generals to prosecute telemarketing scammers. And finally, when these illegal robocallers do get caught, they're going to face a fine of up to $10,000 per call. When you consider that these robocallers are being dialed by the hundreds every second, we're talking about a serious financial deterrent. For years now, robocalls have been one of the top issues that New Jerseyans have contacted my office about. And after sending letter after letter to various agencies demanding tougher enforcement and relief for consumers, it's clear that today's laws just aren't cutting it. We need to catch, prosecute, and punish robocallers who make a living ripping off consumers. We need big phone companies to adopt the technology we know can stop spoof calls in their tracks. Simply put, we need to take action to end the scourge of robocalls, and that means we need the majority leader to bring the Trace Act to the floor of the Senate. Americans shouldn't have to feel a sense of dread every time they hear their phone ring. It's time to bring our telemarketing laws into the 21st century and pass the Trace Act. And to talk about this for some real-life people, we're going to start off with Frank Ambrosio. He owns Cafe Margarita downstairs. If you're ever hanging here, I invite you to. It's got good food and great coffee in the Gateway Center, and he has experienced his share of harassing robocalls. Frank?
Thank you, Senator. I'm basically, I've been through, all of us are in the same boat with this scams. I mean, I deal with a lot of people in the building throughout the day, and I get at least a dozen, to 20 calls a day, and I have to stop every time because I'm thinking it's one of my clients calling from the building. They would like to order some kind of, catering order and whatnot. It's just becoming a really harassment, and a lot of times they'll say scam likely right on there, or other times I've had an experience with I'll answer it, or I won't answer it, and I'll say I can't talk right now, and next thing you know, I'm getting into a text message with somebody else asking me, who are you, why are you calling me? So apparently they have somebody else's number somehow, and it's like going, to the other, on the other end. So it's becoming to be a real issue with me and my business, being a small owner. So, I'm glad this has come to this. Debbie has spoken to me about a year ago, and I was hoping, we can get to this, because this is very annoying for everyone, especially when you're driving. The numbers are so similar, the 917 numbers, you think it's a family friend or whatnot. So I hope that, we all can come together and trying to stop these types of calls, so everybody can be, free from all of this. So I just want to, thank the senator for having me speak today, and hopefully we can resolve this matter.
Frank, can you spell your last name?
Yes, it's Ambrosio.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's lunchtime, close to lunchtime, so Frank is going to have to leave us, but you can catch him downstairs at
Yeah,
Cafe
sorry.
Margarita if you want.
Thank you, guys.
All right. Let me ask Larry Frankel, who is a retired constituent from Somerset, who's reached out to our office to complain about unwanted phone calls many times. Larry?
Thank you, Senator. And good morning, everybody. I'm a 75-year-old pediatrician, immunologist, infectious disease specialist who's practiced in the academic world almost 50 years. I've been all over the United States as a teacher, a researcher, a clinician, and indeed traveled to many countries. So I never know when a caller is going to be one of my former patients or a colleague who wants to ask me a question about a patient. Therefore, I just can't ignore my calls. I have a cell phone and a home phone, and both phones get these calls. Sometimes I get 15 or 16 calls a day on the two phones. I've reached out to the New Jersey Attorney General's office, to the township, Franklin Township Police, to Verizon and to AT&T, and really to no avail. So I reached out to Senator Menendez in early 2017 to see what could be done. And I'm really delighted that he and his colleagues are progressing to try to help everybody, all of us, with this very annoying and life-interfering experience. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, let me ask Kit Turner, who is a retired Air Force Master Sergeant from Irvington and runs a nonprofit helping homeless veterans and has been inundated with these illegal calls.
Well, good morning, everybody. I have to answer my phone, okay? Because my phone is a business phone, and I can get calls all hours of the night and day because, you know, I'm here to help our veterans. So I can get calls from all over the states and even some that are not in the states. So I never know when to answer the phone, when not to answer the phone. If we have vets in crisis or homeless or whatever the case may be, I'm there to help. So I have to answer the phone, but getting phone calls telling me that, you know, my student loans, they can help me with my student loans. I don't have any student loans. I love the one where they call me up and tell me that my Microsoft Windows, Word, or whatever is in jeopardy, considering my computer runs on Linux. So, I mean, it's really hard, you know, trying to decipher which calls not to answer. So I'm glad this bill is trying to go through, and it'll help a lot of people because it's very annoying. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you. With that, we're happy to answer some questions.
Senator, would the FTC be the enforcer, and do you have any confidence that they'll actually put this as a priority?
Well, I think it's primarily the FCC that will be the enforcer. And I do believe that if they have the muscle behind them, it'll be a priority. You know, these days, we don't get 44 members of Congress to join on in a bipartisan way to a piece of legislation, and I think it will pass overwhelmingly once it's put on the floor. I think it will be a strong message to the FCC. And of course, like everything, you know, oversight of the Congress is important when they pass a law. So we pass a law making sure it gets enforced, takes the congressional oversight. This is something that may seem in some respects so simple of all the big issues we deal with, but it is one of the most consequential to families in their daily lives. And very often, for those who are more susceptible, those who are a little less savvy, or our seniors who are a little older, they get ripped off. So it's not just the annoyance and the interference in one's life. It's having your personal information be ultimately robbed because you think you're giving it to an entity that deserves to have that information, and in fact, it's not so. And so, you know, I have to be honest with you. I got an IRS call once, well, what was supposedly an IRS call. And I said, I know I paid my taxes. This is not possible. But is it possible that, you know, there's an issue that made a mistake and they got me transfixed with someone else? And I listened to it and I engaged in this conversation. Then I realized, well, this is a fraud. But so, you know, and I consider myself pretty savvy and someone who has jurisdiction over the IRS and the Finance Committee. So all to say that it's very, very easy for someone to fall into the trap of giving out information. So it's critical in terms of personal security as well. Yes?
Why wouldn't the phone companies, like someone big like Verizon, who's huge, why wouldn't they put a stop to this? Does it cost them money? Do they not have the technology? You know, what's holding them up from their customers going crazy? Have you tried to reach out to them?
Yeah, listen, the industry, the FCC's been working with the industry to get this on a voluntary basis. Of course, you know, phone calls, for depending upon where they're placed from, obviously is part of the business of the industry, right? So when we're talking about the massive number of phone calls placed, we're talking about a lot of business. But at the end of the day, there is a far broader universe collectively of consumers in this nation that should be a bigger business, you know, imperative to the companies. So, you know, very often what we'd like industry to do voluntarily only happens when we mandate it. And so that's what the legislation will do.
How do you get to this source?
Let me let it follow up.
Follow up, what if the companies are based in, you know, these farms out of the country, Europe or Asia or whatever, you know, we have people calling from huge factories.
Yeah. So we thought about that. The call, the law requires an authentication piece. which would help people identify if the call is local. So if you see a call from a crazy number abroad, you can bet, unless you happen to have a family member from that particular area code living abroad somewhere, that it's a robocaller. And so that will be a very preventative piece at the end of the day. And then the second part of it would be, to the extent that that external foreign robocaller has any nexus in terms of any company affiliation in the United States, that they would be subject to the law as well.
So that dovetails what I was going to ask. How do you get to the source?
To the source?
The source, to where the calls are coming from.
Well, the reality is that the companies have the ability to determine where a call is originated from. So once we have the ability to have them be reported and the authentication process of the call, that makes them subject to the liability.
So like a call coming from somewhere else in the world, right now they're spoofing our local numbers. With the authentication, they will not be able to spoof
Yes.
local numbers?
Yes.
Has Mitch McConnell given you any indication as to whether he's going to allow this on the floor?
I have not spoken to the majority leader directly, but the chairman of the Commerce Committee, who supported this and had it come out of his committee in a strong bipartisan vote, I got to believe will get time on the floor at the end of the day. I don't see any good reason not to. The only potential opposition to this would be certain industry sources. But at the end of the day, I think this is far-reaching, far more consequential. And look, we're really not stopping anybody's business. We're just simply saying you can't have robocalling that is illicit under the law, and that ultimately is very often for fraudulent purposes. And so, my view of it is that there's plenty of ways to do business. There's plenty of ways to legitimately make money. You shouldn't do it on the back of Americans by defrauding them or dramatically interrupting their personal lives every day.
Senator, I have an off-topic question. What is your response to Trump considering releasing migrants from sanctuary cities?
Well, this is an outrageous abuse of executive power. To have tried to have those who might have been detained and then released to be released into what are so-called sanctuary cities, and to target members of Congress and public officials from those cities is an incredible abuse of power. And it is just, unfortunately, another example of an administration who is willing to violate the rule of law with impunity. And so I'm sure there'll be congressional responses to the revelations.
Going back to this topic, is there a similar bill in the House? Do you have support in the House for that?
Yes, there is a similar bill in the House. I'm not sure if I have the number with me. Let's see.
It may be a 116.
H116.
Yeah.
I'll make sure that Steve Sandberg follows up and gives you. I don't see it in my notes right now, but I'm pretty sure. I'm almost sure there's a House version.
This is your computer reference to it.
It may be that the House version is 116. Yeah. We'll follow up, make sure we're right on the fact there.
How would you enforce penalties against these foreign entities or companies?
Well, when it comes to a foreign entity, it's going to be more challenging. But a lot of this is domestically driven. And so, again, if that foreign entity has any domestic nexus. For example, we have multinational corporations that have some situs in the United States. Once they have some situs, a corporate office, a subsidiary or something else, now we have the ability to attach that company, and that's how they would be attached. If they have absolutely no nexus in the United States, that will be more difficult. What will happen is that the authentication piece will hopefully stop people from at least succumbing to that call.
Do we know?
We've been watching a press conference hosted by New Jersey Senator Bob Menendez. He's proposing legislation to crack down on illegal robocalls and put a stop to what he calls the unwanted harassment.